Okay, so we talked about the Trojan War and how Achilles, this Macedonian, was one of the greatest warriors of the Trojan War time, the Age of Heroes. So now I want to highlight Alexander the Great, the Macedonian. Alexander was one of the greatest generals of all time, one of my personal favorites as well. So we're going to talk about how Alexander the Macedonian came from Achilles the Macedonian, Greek, and how this Trojan War really led up to Alexander. So the Trojan War happened around, let's say, 1200 BC, depending on, I'm just going to give that as a rough draft timeline, depending on, what the historians will argue and debate. Okay, I also want to highlight that during this time, you have the Israelites. You basically have them forming as well during this whole chaos from Alexander, from the Trojan War. You have Abraham coming from Babylon during this whole time period. But let's talk, so I also want to highlight, that was the age of heroes during these Trojan Wars. That was the golden age. The golden age, in a sense, to where we honored our gods, where life in society was about purity. Now we're in this age of Kali Yuga where, just like God and Jesus said, we're born in sin now. This is the age of Kali Yuga. But back then, they were really all about virtue. Okay, if a woman came outside half naked, if you stole some rice, you might get your hand cut off. Okay, things are very about virtue. Now we're more lax as a society, just all around the globe. Also, back in the golden age, the fighting style was very different. We see how Achilles, during the Trojan War, he fought hand-to-hand combat. Okay, he fought hand-to-hand combat against these Amazon woman warriors. He fought hand-to-hand combat against Memnon from Ethiopia and Egypt, Nubia. He also fought hand-to-hand combat against Hector of Troy. So in this era, it really was very big on let's send out your best man, and this man is going to represent your country, and fight. So we're going to put your best man out there, and he's going to fight and represent. That was really more in that golden age era. Another thing that reminds me of that kind of style is David versus Goliath. You have these big armies behind you, but at the same time, let's send out your best fighters. David and Goliath. Okay. Whoever wins out of that, we all win. Okay. Now you fast forward to Alexander the Great's time. Now it's more about the generals fighting more behind the lines. Alexander the Great, he still was considered a frontline fighter at different times, but it wasn't necessarily him going hand-to-hand combat against the opposite general until the time for the tactic called for it, of course. But it was more about the general working in tactics with his troops. And then now you fast forward all the way to modern times, and now you have, the general might not even be on the battlefield, especially the president, the actual king, okay? So, the general might call the shots all the way from back in the homeland while the war is all the way overseas. So I'm just showing you how the battle styles and from the Golden Age to Kali Yuga, how the things change. Okay. So let's go back. Okay, so we're going to talk about Alexander the Great. Okay, so you have this Trojan War collapse. So that basically is the collapse of this Golden Age era. So we see how Rome was founded. We see how Carthage was founded. So let's see how this great Macedonian empire is founded. So let's go a little bit before Alexander's time, the Battle of Thermopylae, where you have Leonidas and his 300 Spartan Greeks fight against Xerxes. Okay, because that is also very important. So after Troy, you still have these Greeks united. So really this Greek history goes back a long time, whether, different phases of being united or fighting against each other, united, civil wars, united. Okay. So now you have these 300 Greeks holding off these Persian invasion. So really, if it wasn't for those 300 Greeks, you probably wouldn't have the Alexander the Great. Thanks for the Greek civilization and those Spartans and Leonidas that their civilization carried on all the way to today. It heavily influenced the Roman civilizations. Okay. Also, another important thing about 300 fighting these Persians is that you have these Persians come all the way from Mesopotamia and conquer Asia. So where these Trojans used to be now, now that whole area is conquered by the Persians. Also, these same Persians conquered the lands of Canaan, Israel, Palestine, and Egypt as well. So you have Cambyses II conquering Amasis II of Egypt. This shows how there were many conquerings of Israel and Egypt throughout history. Before the Babylon invasion of Syria and Egypt, you have the Assyrian invasion of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar fought against Necho II of Egypt. That's how you get, so many times when Israel was conquered, Egypt was also conquered, or at least very threatened. Okay, so you have these many different invasions of Israel and Egypt. Okay, but it was very critical when these Persians had conquered Egypt, when Amasis II went down from the 26th dynasty. Okay, Amasis II of the 26th dynasty of Egypt, he was considered one of the last native pharaohs of Egypt. That's also how you get the Assyrian the Assyrian captivity of the Israelites, also the Israelite captivity of the Babylonians and the Persians. Okay, Assyrian and Babylonian are pretty much the same thing. Babylon was a country in Assyria. Okay, so this is how you get the Assyrian Babylonian captivity and also the Persian captivity. Okay. So now you have Alexander the Great and his father Philip. So his father Philip really did a lot of the hard work in building up Macedonia, because you have these Spartans and these different coalitions of Greeks already, from the Thebans to the Spartans. So really conquering Greeks and uniting them was a very great task to do, which started with Philip, Alexander's father. So Philip had really built up the infrastructure, the economy, and of course the military. So when King Philip died and it was time for Alexander to take over, really he inherited an already powerful kingdom. Even though he did inherit a powerful kingdom, his feats are still amazing, because he took this Macedonian kingdom and really turned that kingdom into an empire that united the Greeks and also went all the way into Egypt. He conquered Asia, Israel, Palestine area, and Egypt as well. And that's when Alexander became Pharaoh. So the Battle of Gaugamela is where you have Alexander facing against Darius of Persia, one of the great battles of history. So Alexander ultimately defeated this army. Alexander was known for his amazing cavalry, the companion cavalry. During that battle against Darius, he ended up seeing an opening, a weakness through the front line, and he exploited it and chased Darius down. But ultimately, Darius was able to escape. He fled and left his men on the battlefield, and that led to many different battles of a cat and mouse game, okay? But ultimately, Darius ended up dying. So really, after Alexander beat this great Persian conqueror, that was a big statement in that time period. So he beat them in battle. And as he made his way from basically Troy, Asia, Turkey, he kept the coastal lines. He made a point to take the coastal provinces down to Israel, down to Egypt. Many of these provinces, yes, he conquered them, but it wasn't necessarily through battle. Many of them surrendered. They submitted to Alexander. They said, okay, we're not even going to fight you. So he did what he had to do to make his statement. And that's how Alexander the Great became Pharaoh of Egypt. That's how Alexander the Great was the actual progenitor of Cleopatra being in Egypt. Because when Alexander ended up dying, he ended up dying in Babylon. So Alexander, after he conquered Egypt, he also went into Asia and also went into India. So he wanted to conquer India as well, which he had successes with, but also troubles. The Indians weren't playing around with him. But he was able to conquer Babylon territory, Mesopotamia, where he ultimately died. Okay? So after he died, he had these great territories from Macedon, Syria, and Egypt. So the Diadochi split up. The Diadochi meaning his successors, Alexander's successors, which were his generals, his loyal generals to him. But after he died, many of these generals had civil wars. So you had the kingdom of Macedon that stayed, his original kingdom. You had the Seleucid Empire. And you also had, of course, his Egyptian territories. Also the territories in Asia. So his kingdom had fractured. This great and mighty kingdom, empire, had fractured. And that's how you get the Ptolemy dynasty being inputted in Egypt. Which led to Cleopatra, the seventh. Okay? So from the fall of Troy, we see the many different things the Greeks had to go through. Okay? From Leonidas to the 300, all the way to Alexander the Great of Macedon. All the way to Cleopatra. Okay? But by the time the Romans got to Cleopatra, the Romans had pretty much already conquered the Greeks' territories. But as they conquered them, but at the same time, the Greeks had a big influence on this Roman society. So, I just wanted to really dig deep on Alexander the Great and his actual conquest, just so we could get a big picture of what's going on now after the Trojan War. Also, throughout this whole time, Israel is going through things. From Abraham in Babylon, going all the way to Egypt and Canaan, from his descendants being in Canaan and then going into Egypt. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Jacob's name was later changed to Israel. Jacob's son was Joseph, the king of dreams. He one of the leaders of Egypt. Okay, so throughout this whole time, the Greeks are going through things, the Israelites are going through things, and you really just see how world events are affecting each other throughout this ancient Mediterranean world. All the way from Nebuchadnezzar to Darius to Xerxes. Also Cyrus. So, this is just giving us a very colorful, painted picture of the Mediterranean ancient world and how that leads up to us today.